The election of 1932 brings in a new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Let's talk about him so that we can understand what's going on. First of all, he was a fifth cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, very much like him. He was an aristocrat, an only child of very wealthy parents, and he grew up in an oppressive estate. His life was one of wealth and privilege. He had a private education. He went to Harvard, Columbia Law School. He didn't finish law school, though. He soon married a distant cousin, Eleanor Roosevelt. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt's uncle was Teddy Roosevelt. He served in the state legislature, in the New York state legislature, and the biggest difference was that FDR was a Democrat. The reason why he was a Democrat is because Teddy Roosevelt had numerous sons, and it was expected that they would be in the New York State Republican Party. So yet another Roosevelt in the New York State Republican Party? No, it's a crowded field. So FDR decided to become a Democrat. But the difference really is not that much. He was a lot like TR in the way that the fact that he loved the American system as well. He also complained, like Roosevelt, against the wealthy businessmen who were not responsible. FDR, all of his life, was a man who was basically characterized as a person with tremendous self-confidence and optimism. It really is who he was. And this is a time period when the country needed a confidence man. And he's the perfect individual to do it. He's a great con man in a sense. But you have to remember, in 1921, at the age of 39, he is hit with a disease called polio. Infant paralysis. A man who has had everything before is now a cripple. He would never actually walk alone in a normal sense like you and I would think about for the rest of his life. He overcame it. It would have been so much of an easier thing for him to do if he just gave up, he felt sorry for himself. Yet he got into political life as soon as he was able to. Some say this is what caused FDR to have so much optimism. But FDR's confidence and optimism got him through it, and the events that surrounded his presidency. There's something else to consider here. In terms of relating to the public, here is a man who had everything and was humbled through a disease, in a sense. So he was able to better understand what the public was going through, and the public would respond to him in kind. He's kind of like Bill Clinton, but on steroids. Bill Clinton famously said that he felt your pain. Well, FDR, he felt your pain and even more. Now, going into the election of 1932, the Democrats were in a position that they could pretty much not lose. They nominated FDR, the governor of New York. When he was nominated in New York City, he gave his acceptance speech. And let me read a little bit. He says, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. So we've had Teddy's square deal, and now we have FDR's new deal. The Republicans are going to renominate Hoover. And Hoover said that if the Democrats get elected, businesses are going to fail, grass is going to grow in the streets, and weeds are going to take over the farm, and a whole bunch of other things. That's kind of funny, because I think it's already happening. But nevertheless, what FDR wanted to do in terms of campaigning? Well, not much. I mean, all they had to do really was go around and say, I'm not Hoover. That's how real bad it was, right? But he does promise a few things. He promises three things. First of all, a government that would provide direct relief to the people. Number two, he talked about a plan that would bring back agricultural production due to overproduction. And number three, he talked about a plan to recover industrially. FDR wins easily, and he becomes president of the United States in March of 1933. Now, to this day, there are very extreme views of FDR. Some view him as pretty much the savior of the United States. Many households had pictures of FDR on their walls. I challenge you, look around your walls and tell me, do you have a picture of any president of the United States? To people in labor unions, you would have thought that he was the one that created them. To African Americans, he's pretty much the best friend they've had since Abraham Lincoln. Maybe even better. To people with a liberal point of view, it was the highest point of their lives, and in fact, it pretty much still is. He's a savior. Now, to some, he's a destroyer. He led this country into too much overspending, too much government welfare, too much regulation, destroying enterprise, initiative, America itself. There are people with that belief today. To some, at the very best, FDR was a fool and a crook, and at worst, he was a communist in the terminal stages of syphilis. This is what they said about him. There were a lot of people that wouldn't even speak his name. They would just say, that man. Now, there are a lot of really exaggerated views, and they are. The President of the United States is a very powerful person, but the last time I checked, he's not God. He sometimes is able to play and act like one, but nevertheless, he's not one in the end. The President of the United States is going to be subject to all kinds of pressures, special interests, factions within his party, not to mention the opposing party. So FDR was pushed and pulled in a lot of different directions. And I think what FDR probably did, rather than work off some sort of set out plan, was to operate on an experimental basis, trying different approaches, cooking something up, throwing against the wall. If it sticks, great. If not, try again. So there's really not a philosophy, unless you count try this, try that, a philosophy. And it worked. Hoover had a philosophy that didn't really work well. And so why not this approach? FDR did not have a set policy as to what he was going to do. Or we will do this and we will do that and go on to the next step. Instead, it was primarily trying different things and keeping those that worked and got rid of things that didn't. But it does have a broad purpose. FDR's purpose is, let's see here, threefold. Number one, save representative government, representative democracy in this country. Look around the world around this time period. What's going on? Fascism, dictatorships. FDR wanted to save representative democracy. Number two, he wanted to save private property capitalism. Hadn't it been good to his family? Just like Teddy, right? He wasn't a socialist, by the way. In the 1930s, Eugene V. Debs was already dead, and there was a new socialist leader in the country named Norman Thomas. Someone went to Thomas and told him that FDR was going to carry out the socialist platform. Thomas responded, yeah, on a stretcher. You see, Thomas understood what FDR was, and in terms of his reforms, maintaining private property capitalism was certainly going to undermine socialist change. The third goal, or third purpose, was going to be to try to maintain individual welfare. He did not want to see people digging through the trash. It's not that Hoover didn't. It's just that FDR was willing to go further. And I lied. There's a fourth thing. The last thing he wanted to do was deal with economic security, trying not to make the Great Depression or something like it ever happen again. FDR did not see a group of people as the enemy of his fight. His enemy was the Depression itself, an economic collapse. Another way of looking at FDR's programs is what we call the 3 R's: relief, recovery, reform. Relief, basically money for the unemployed, money for the homeless, money for the hungry. Recovery, get these people working again. And reform, basically programs that were trying to make sure that the Great Depression never happened again. Now, although Hoover had tried to do the same, FDR was able to make people believe that they were going to survive and make it through the Depression. He instilled confidence. That's pretty much the single most important thing about FDR here. Now, obviously, if you say these things, you're going to have to back it up, and FDR is going to do something in a hurry. Now, I want you to think about something. Consider the dire straits of the country and ask yourself, if Roosevelt was a radical, do you think he could have pushed a lot of radical things? One person during this period actually said that if Roosevelt moved into the White House, started a fire in the basement that burned the White House down, people in America would have said, by God, at least he started a fire. If FDR was, as some have claimed, a socialist, what would he have done to propose, say, with the banking system, right? Government ownership. That would have been socializing the central, mainstream regulator of the entire economy. He could have easily used this argument to destroy private enterprise and capitalism because he believed it would have failed, right? So let's make it a government enterprise? As we see in the next series of lectures, FDR really doesn't do that.